How do you present weird settings to players? I find it hard to pass even settings like Dark Sun to players who aren't already fans.
Yeah, weird settings are often the most interesting, certainly for games masters, perhaps slightly less so for players, but they are hard to get people into, and the weirder they are, the harder it is to get people to buy in, I think. And I think that's why generic fantasy has remained so popular, right? It's a fantasy game. Elves, dwarves, whatever. Everyone is familiar with the kind of tropes, pseudo-medievalism, all of that kind of stuff. And even if it strays slightly from that, you can usually get away with it. Like, it's a standard D&D fantasy world, but there is something different, or something extra, or there isn't something. Yeah, you can get away with that. You could say a low magic setting, a high magic setting, whatever. So that's easy, and I think that's part of the reason for the longevity of generic fantasy in the D&D mold. When it comes to truly weirder settings, I think it does become more difficult because nothing is necessarily familiar and there are no points of reference. The weirder it gets. Something like Mechanical Dream, for example, is pretty difficult to get your head around without reading the book, and you can't really expect people to read and absorb the whole book before they start playing. I don't think that's a realistic assumption to have. Dark Sun, which you mention, is a weird one because it's not actually that weird. It is pulp, swords and sandals sort of fantasy, but intermixed with D&D tropes. If you just say sort of Conan the Barbarian, metal is rare, wizards kill the world when they cast magic, you're kind of halfway there. You know, you can talk about gladiators and cannibal halflings, and you can kind of bullet point the various aspects that are interesting and different, and that will go a long way to do it. Otherwise, I find in general the best way to introduce people to a setting is to just give them the basic information and what their character would know, and make them quite sort of local, and then to introduce the world information as you go along. And that goes for ordinary settings as well as the weirder, more offbeat settings. Regardless, you know, that is a great way to introduce people to a setting. Maybe that's part of why Isekai is so popular, because that whole fish out of water thing is a great way to have a character ask questions about the world and be given information about the world bit by bit, because that kind of is what you would do. But yeah, I think the best way to introduce all settings, weird or not, is to introduce them bit by bit through play. Can be difficult because not every game is set up for a band of ignoramuses to wander the land, gradually learning things about the setting. But that is a good way to do it, and I think it's also useful for the first few sessions to pick out something particular that is odd or different or culturally significant about the setting, and to have the adventure encompass that point so that you can come to understand it by playing. Learn by doing is the short version.